Say my name. I am awake. I am the danger. I am the one who knocks.
Welcome back. Breaking into Breaking Bad, Season 5, Episode 10, Buried. Cabes, why don't you tell us what this episode is about for those who have not seen it for a little while?
Sure. This one has a pretty iconic part in it where you see Saul's two guys lay down on Walt's money. I'll get to that a little bit later, but that's always a very heavily shared GIF per se. But this one takes place right after the last one ended, and basically Hank beats Walt to getting in contact with Skylar and is able to basically spill the beans per se and convince Skylar to meet him at a diner, where he kind of goes into this whole thing and letting her know that he knows without divulging really any info into her involvement. And once she kind of figures out that he is more so guessing and has a pretty good theory of what's going on, she finds a way to get out and kind of flee the scene, where she's trying to get hold of Walt, who's panicking, doesn't know what's going on, wasn't able to get a hold of Skylar, so he's kind of assuming the worst. And so we get to the part where Saul's guys collect the money, and he goes and spends the rest of the day burying it somewhere out in the desert. We'll kind of get into more of the details of this one. And it ends kind of on a weird note because we're brought back to the opening scene with Jesse, who was throwing his money out haphazardly to the around a neighborhood, and Hank shows up to see what more information he can get out of because he's connecting all the dots. So this one was fun. So I'm looking forward to getting into this one.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the title of the episode seems pretty obvious. Buried refers to Walt burying his money. So let's talk about the intro. So the intro, there's this old man, random old man who's living in a kind of poor part of town. And he's just walking around, and he starts seeing wads of $100 bills that we know Jesse had been throwing around out of his car. And the man starts obsessively picking them up and kind of trying to trace them to their source in a way. And he traces them back to Jesse, who's in a park on a kind of a merry-go-round thing, laying down in a daze. And there's a very creepy, like metal creaking sound going on. It's very horror scene-esque. But that's how it ends, from which we, can say Jesse's certainly not well.
Right.
It's like the guilt has almost killed him. And he's tried to purge himself by getting rid of the money in a way. But his car is there, right, with all the money in it.
It's a good point you brought up. He's always trying to go backwards in his actions. And when Walt dropped off the money in the last episode, it's almost like he wished he had never gotten it. He had a gun, and he threw the gun away, or rolled it away, and he just he doesn't want any part of it, because you're right that his conscience is getting the better of him, and we see that he's dwindling down by throwing all the money. And when the guy walked up, his car door was open and all the cash was in there. And so,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting contrast with Walt. So, I mean, one thing we can say about Jesse is he doesn't seem to care about getting caught. You know what I mean? His car is there with all the money. If a cop were to arrest him or walk up, it'd be pretty obvious that he's up to something. so he doesn't really seem to care. And then Walt, on the other hand, so that's the end of the intro, and then we can just get into the beginning of the show. So it picks up with Walt leaving Hank's garage, and we know they had that altercation at the end of the last episode in Hank's garage. And it's funny, Walt kind of leaves sort of slowly, and then he gets in his car and he immediately just pulls out of there and calls Skylar. And I think I can't tell, maybe it's almost as if he knew that it would be a race between him and Hank to see who could get a hold of Skylar first. And Hank ends up doing that. But to finish what I was saying earlier, the contrast between Jesse and Walt, whereas Jesse doesn't seem to care about getting caught, Walt seems obsessed about avoiding it.
Right. I mean, he was trying to keep his Heisenberg hat on until the garage door fully closed. And then you're right, he got in the car and sped out of there. Then he sees Hank come out with his phone in his hand also.
Yeah.
And at that point, you could tell it's like, I know exactly who he's going to go after. But ultimately, Walt still doesn't know everything. He doesn't know all the details about what Hank knows. So at this point, he's like when you were little and you knew you were going to be in trouble, but you just didn't know how in trouble you were. You didn't know how much your parents knew. That's kind of how he's reacting, and he's assuming the worst, but he also is trying to be precautious.
Yeah. So he ends up not getting in touch with Skylar, and Hank gets in touch with Skylar, and he gets her to sort of panic, or maybe he communicates to her that he knows something. So they meet at a diner, and here's the question. I don't know the degree to which Hank is genuinely concerned about Skylar and concerned about justice, and to what degree Hank just wants the scalp.
Oh, for sure. For sure, it's the scalp. I mean, that's at least 90% of it, and maybe
90%. Okay, so maybe 99.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the highest part, and then obviously the justice kind of goes hand in hand with that. And then at the end of their discussion, you could tell there was a little bit of, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to bring the kids over to our house, and you need to come here. So I would maybe say 5% was thinking the safety of Skylar.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I mean, this is what he's been going for since season 1. He's been going after this stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he's playing it cool with Skylar, and he says things like, you're going to need to do this, and he's like saying, I feel so sorry for you. He treats her like she's been married to an abusive husband. And he's like, I understand there's like shame and like you've been trying to hide it, and I'm here for you. I mean, it's a lot of sympathy. I'm suffering with you in this. And she's sort of buying it, and then he reveals more about what he's actually after when he pulls the recorder out of his pocket, and he says, and if you'll just state for the record your name and tell me exactly what, like he's trying to get a confession, a statement, he's, and she knows that's exactly what you're trying to do right now. And I think Skylar then realizes, I don't know how much he knows. And so she, in a sense, pleads the fifth, even though she's not really under arrest. And she asks him, am I under arrest? And she's sort of thinking in terms of rights. Like, I know what my rights are. If I'm not under arrest, I don't have to say this or do this or whatever. And she knows he doesn't have enough evidence now to arrest me.
And she also used the being in a public space to get erratic so that it was easier to leave.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she threatened to scream rape or whatever, and he would have been under suspicion. And I think he knows he gets caught when she says that, because he says, believe me, there's no one that matters more to me in this world than your sister. And I want the best of what, we want the same thing. Our interests are the same here. And then she says, "But okay, well, I want a lawyer." And he says, "No, you don't want to do that. You don't want a lawyer." And she says, "Well, you're not wanting me to have a lawyer really makes me doubt that you have my best interest in mind." And he kind of, it's clear on his face.
Smart.
Yeah, that she called him out on it. And she says at one point that he seems to want to get Walt, quote, "at any cost." And that's when it's not justice that he's after primarily.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that his motives are mixed, because that's pretty human. Like there are very few people who are completely villain. Everybody has some good justification.
Well, I would say
tell themselves.
From personal past experience working in loss prevention, I was catching shoplifters and I was catching employees that were stealing. And yes, there was that sense of me that wanted to be like, this is a moral good that I am doing because I am retrieving a stolen product for someone that is paying me to do this. So there was that sense of feeling, but there was also the sense of, I just got to catch. It's a
game.
Yes. I caught this person because of
you're hunting. Yeah.
What I did. And that was exciting. And so,
yeah. And you had a couple people that, were kind of notorious, right? I mean, it became a chess match between you and them.
Yeah, man.
But you got him in the end, right?
Of course. Always get my
man. Okay, so now this situation has shifted where we're not really sure what Skylar's. What is she wanting? Is she looking for a plea deal to turn Walt in? Is she going to be willing to take a hit for the sake of Walt? And Walt, more importantly, doesn't know either. He doesn't know if he can trust her. She talked to Hank. He doesn't know what she said. And so there's just a lot of distrust right now. The whole situation, and Hank obviously doesn't trust anything that Walt says.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole family dynamic is just blown up. So Walt is panicking and he is trying to preserve his money. And so he goes to see Saul, and Saul's, offering advice. And we presume that he advises Walt to let him send his guys, the two guys that work for Saul all the time.
QB. Yeah,
those guys. To go and put all of Walt's money in barrels in a van, bring it to him. And so, there's the scene when they go to retrieve the money, and it's the biggest pile of money that they've ever seen. And Huel, who's a big teddy bear, has a really funny urge that is fun. It's weird, but somehow we can all
he said
know what he's talking about.
I got to do it, man.
And he's a heavy boy,
just gets so comfortable, like he's trying on the new mattress and rooms to go. Just
he just lays down on it.
All I'm saying.
Yeah, right. So that's a funny scene. So he says, like we could just take this money and disappear. Saul never has to see us. And QB says, well, I don't know exactly what he says. But he says, remember, this is the guy who killed 8 guys in 2 minutes, in like multiple prisons. This is not a guy that we don't want to steal from this guy.
Right. All I'm saying.
Right. So then there's an interesting scene in Saul's office where Saul's trying to, do what he does, which is offer advice. And, he's good because he's not emotionally wrapped up in any of this. So he can sort of see things really clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And so he finds a way to suggest, well, we could just kill Hank. Nobody else knows any of this. Everybody thinks Hank is crazy. So if we just kill Hank, then the problem goes away. And it's objectively a good, suggestion. But what's funny is that Walt blows up at him and yells at him and says, no, Hank is family.
Right.
And that's really interesting to me because we already talked about how the dynamic between the family is all blown up right now. There's no trust.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that not too long ago, Hank like punched Walt, and that look in his eyes was like, I am going to throw you in prison for the rest of your life, and I'm never going to think about you again. That's the look that he was giving Walt. And here Walt is defending him. And let's remember, they're not related by anything but the law.
Right.
They are brothers in law. They are not blood brothers. And so Walt is exhibiting a loyalty to Hank here and to the institution of marriage, and even the connection that brings two men who married sisters. It's just interesting to me, right? Because like when we think about that, what does it mean to say they're brothers-in-law? It means convention has determined sort of arbitrarily that they are related, even though before, like, they share no DNA.
Right.
And it's only in law that they are connected. And yet, what is the whole basis of this story but the story of Walt flouting the law? So why should he care?
He didn't think twice about murdering Mike, who was his partner, who he had spent all this time with. And when it came to Hank, he just draws a line at family. And he has said over and over, everything he does is for his family. But obviously we know that, or have known that, to be immediate family. So for him to have a knee-jerk reaction to Saul's suggestion to off Hank to a straight no, he's family, he's off limits. Yeah, you're right. You would think that after having that kind of situation that he had with Hank, that he would not, he'd be more open to that idea.
Yeah.
But he wasn't.
Because he's panicking, right? I mean, what do you do when you panic? What do they say? It's fight or flight. You think he would either want to fight, i.e. kill Hank, or flee the situation somehow. And here he's not doing that. And maybe this speaks to something that's natural in the family that happens even between people who are not married, or connected rather by blood. People who, like, you see this with married couples, though they are not blood related, they live together as man and wife, and the natural affections start to develop such that it's as if the bonds that they create are like blood. And that happens even with an extended family to some degree. And you see here a loyalty that Walt has toward Hank is of that kind. Or maybe we can say that Walt feels a blood connection to Marie because she's related to Walt's wife, and Marie's married to Hank. So there's that connection. My point is just that there's a mix of convention, the law that connects them, and something that approaches nature, this, like, the natural affections that have been created to create something so strong that even in the face of absolute interest, it's in Walt's interest to get rid of Hank, and in the face of panic, anxiety, and a feeling of necessity, like I have no choice, Walt is still saying, I'm going to defend Hank, and I'm not going to lower myself to those options, even though, as you noted, he's done things in the past when he's basically said, yeah, well, we got to do it. Like, we got to do this horrendous thing because we don't have any other choice.
Something I just thought of. I wonder, and I don't got to get your thoughts on this because you probably have a better insight on this, but I wonder if there's also a certain level of respect that he has for Hank, Walt being the prey this whole time and evading Hank, that there's this level of Jean Valjean type of scenario. He mostly just says family, though, so probably not. But this whole time.
I don't know if Jean Valjean feels a pride for Javert. You're talking about Les Miserables.
Yep.
There is a kind of connection that they feel, though, I think, for one another.
Right.
Like they almost need each other.
Right. Because it was this whole
Yeah, I won't get into the Hegelian master slave dynamic where
I was about to, but I will choose not to.
yeah, where one understands oneself only in terms of what one's not, or the opposite, so.
Right.
But we won't go down that road. We're not gonna go there.
Maybe another time.
Another time. Yeah, yeah. But no, fair point. Maybe there's a kind of codependency, you could say.
Hmm.
Perhaps.
So I think
Well,
Marie shows up.
yeah. So Walt goes and drives his money out to the desert and spends himself burying it. And you can imagine how. I mean, with a shovel. I mean that's insane. He's an old man dying of cancer,
51.
lung cancer, and
Yeah.
he's. So anyway, so Marie comes over and Hank is there, and Skylar is not sure if she can trust Marie because she seems to be an agent of Hank, and fair enough, but she's also her sister, so she lets her in, and there's sympathy, and I'm so sorry this has happened to you. This is so sad. And disbelief, like, is it really true? Did this really happen? And then it's all sort of settling in for Marie, and then she realizes, wait a minute, you knew about this at the time when Hank was shot, and she's just trying to connect dots, and she's starting to panic herself, and she assumes you knew something that could have prevented Hank from getting shot. And she's thinking about how close, Hank came to dying and how much close she came to losing him. And it's possible that Skylar had a way to prevent that. And so now she has no trust for Skylar.
Right.
And she
the
slaps
gambling
her.
story and buying the car wash, all of that was a ruse.
Right. Right. Yeah. So she knows that they've piled lie upon lie to her, and she doesn't know what to believe anymore. So yeah. So now that relationship is on the ropes.
Tries to take Holly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That was a really gut wrenching scene. So Marie is suffering under multiple feelings. One of which is I'm angry at my sister. The other one is I have to protect my niece from this psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
and then Skylar just goes primal on her, like, I'm a mother and you're taking my child, like, I don't care who you are, I will kill you.
Right. And Hank
Hank intervenes and says, Skylar, Marie, put Holly down, and we're not going to win this one. And it seems like that, though, that tell me that Hank's not, like, he's still thinking, like, he's still got his wits about him, like he knows the right thing to do.
Sure. And in a sense, similar,
because he could have kidnapped Holly and then said something like, Skylar, you either will give Holly back on the condition that you turn Walt in, or something. Right. You know what I mean? Like, he could have gone to that length, and that would have been an interesting twist in the story, but he doesn't do that.
Right. No, similar to how Walt was kind of freaking out, he was doing the same thing at the very beginning with Skylar, and then at the end, we'll talk about this when he sits down with Marie and they actually discuss next steps and strategy. That's when he
puts
his DEA cap back on and goes from there.
Yeah. Yeah. So Walt comes back from burying the money. He's exhausted. He falls asleep on the bathroom floor for 4 to 5 hours, and Skylar's there kind of nursing him back to health. And when he wakes up and realizes she's there, he's like, wait a minute, you talked to Hank. I don't know if I can trust you. Are you just being nice to me so that, like, are you wearing a wire? Like, the lack of trust, you really just see how that just erodes the relationship to such a high.
They had built it up just recently too, after him retiring, and they were back to
right. They built the trust up. Yeah,
normal marriage.
Yeah. And so Hank had told her that his cancer was back, and he thought she knew. She didn't know. And so she sort of confronts Walt with that, and he asks her if that makes her happy. And his voice kind of changes, and it's really kind of creepy. And the whole time he's assuming that she's made a deal with Hank. And so he says,
off, did you realize that was the very first question she asks him? Wasn't about, what are we going to do? What did Hank say? Blah, blah, blah. The first thing she says was asking about the cancer.
Yeah.
So it's just come a long ways from last season where she was not even talking to this man to now, even in the face of them being arrested, the first thing she says was, "Is your cancer really back?"
Right. And that suggests she still loves him.
Right.
But he's not really able to see that because he's obsessed with the thought that she's made a deal with Hank. And so he says, I'll make it really easy for you. I will give myself up on the condition that you keep the money and pass it on to our children. And he has a really revealing line. He says, please, Skylar, don't let all this have been in vain. And you see, it's a project that he's been building. And I'll go back to that line where he says, I'm not in the money business, I'm in the empire business. Well, he's always been in both. He's always been amassing money so that he can pass it on to his children and give them security and feel like I did that. Like I did that. Remember that scene when he's holding Holly? And he's like, Daddy did that, pointing at the money in the wall. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, his pride is wrapped up in it so much that it's often, not always, and not completely, but it's often and also about him winning and beating all the other people and taking great pleasure in that. And here he's saying, he's defending his money kingdom, and he's like, please, I'll turn myself in. I'll debase myself in front of the law, in front of Hank, if you will take the money. And Skylar, in a way, proves that she didn't make a deal with Hank by letting him know that Hank only has suspicions and that he doesn't really have anything concrete. And so she says there's like no way that he even can give himself up without giving up the money. And so she's tying those things together. So she suggests that they both just lay low for a little while. And I don't know how Walt takes that.
He's probably surprised, to be honest, because I think, well, first off, he was so exhausted, and he wakes up on the bathroom floor and is having this conversation with Skylar.
Right.
When this is going down. And so, yeah, I think he is a little surprised, because I think at that point he probably thought Hank had definitely gotten to her.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Lydia, we all remember Lydia, she goes to visit the guys that Walt was using for distribution. And presumably Walt sold them the rest of his methylamine, and they've been carrying on the cooking. But the quality has gone way, way down. And so Lydia's there to express her dissatisfaction with the quality, which they've been receiving complaints on, I don't know, in the Czech Republic or wherever they're selling it. We see she insists on seeing the lab where they're cooking, and they take her down, and then all hell breaks out, and we realize that she has ambushed all of those guys with Todd's uncle and his guys, who are pretty good at killing people, we learn. And so she's still very much a player in the background, and the empire, the meth empire, is still going on. Like, I think that's what that's meant to communicate, that though Walt and Jesse are out of it now, that thing is still in motion. And
right.
I don't know where it's going, but we can assume that it's still happening. Right. And yeah, right. And people are still very much invested, like Lydia. Okay, then it switches to Marie trying to persuade Hank to just go into the DEA and just tell them about Walt. And Hank says he has to wait until he has proof. He says that he's convinced that the day that he tells them that his own brother-in-law was the guy that he's been chasing this whole time, Heisenberg, that'll be the last day of his tenure at the DEA. I'm not exactly sure I follow that. I mean, is it because they would assume mass incompetence on his part? Like, how could you not have known? But I mean,
yes,
maybe for that very reason. Like, who would assume this high school chemistry teacher? We all know Walt. And like, the last person you're going to assume is your brother-in-law. So I don't know. I'm not sure I followed it.
I think what he's saying is that it would just be extremely difficult to prove that, one, it wasn't incompetence, too, he wasn't involved in some way. He just wanted to be able to walk in with cuffs on and have it be as clear as day, especially how long this case has gone on and how they thought it ended. And I mean, it's been dragged on for so long. And for the fact that it was right under his nose, I think he was just like I'm in charge of this whole show.
Right.
And I just have to be sure. I can't just come in with suspicions.
Yeah, and he knows the level, the threshold he's got to meet,
right,
for evidence and all that. And he also knows that everybody's thought he's crazy this whole time, and so he's got to have like beyond convincing proof before he can't go in and just say, "Hey, I've got another lead now." They're just going to think he's crazy. So
yeah.
So that's the situation he's in, but he knows that he can still. He has to report to work, so he still goes in, and then he sees Jesse, who was arrested for what we suggested at the beginning, throwing all of his money away, being suspicious. So he's brought in on a charge of suspicion by some guys who were questioning him, and he's in a kind of just psychotic state. I mean, he's just not there. And the guys who are questioning him are really harassing him, trying to get him to open up and testify against himself and expose, some evidence against him. But he's just not saying anything. Well, is it kind of by accident that Hank learns that Jesse's there?
Yes, Gomi comes up to him and was like, "Hey, I'm glad to see you back in the office. Listen, we have a board meeting at this time, and you'll never guess who just washed up on the Troopers, network, whatever, with $2 million or however much money it was."
So then Hank walks in and basically, we're led to believe, illegally tells gets those guys to leave him with with Jesse. And that's when
"Hey, do you mind just watching our suspect while we go have a smoke break?" Like, it was very...
Yeah. Right. And so the last thing we see is Hank walking in to talk with Jesse, and that's the end, and the credits roll. So it's a bit of a cliffhanger. We don't know what's going to happen next. Is he going to? And we remember the history. I mean, Hank put Jesse in the hospital.
Right.
So is this going to seeing Hank in that way? Is that going to just make Jesse snap out of it? I don't know.
We'll see.
We'll have to see. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate your attention, and we appreciate your liking and sharing this episode with your friends and neighbors. Thanks for following us on our social media accounts. We are on Twitter and YouTube at Breaking Into BB, and feel free to reach out if you got questions or anything like that. And we will talk to you next time we break into the next episode of Breaking Bad.